I'm Leah, 25. Yesterday, my mom slammed the door in my face when I asked to sleep on their couch for one night. My apartment was completely flooded. I was standing there in my work clothes, holding a pillow, and she looked at me like I was some homeless stranger asking for spare change. "We're not a hotel," she said. "Find a shelter." Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt unappreciated by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Funny thing is, this wasn't even surprising. See, I've been the unpaid nanny, housekeeper, and personal assistant to the Williams family since I was 8 years old. That's when my parents decided having 3 kids was too much work, so they'd just make the oldest one do everything. While other kids my age were playing with dolls or watching cartoons, I was changing my baby brother Tommy's diapers and making sure my sister Jessica got to soccer practice on time. Mom worked part-time at a dental office. Dad worked construction, and apparently their solution to childcare was just to promote their 3rd grader to full-time employee. I had a literal schedule on the refrigerator. Monday through Friday. Wake up Jessica and Tommy, make breakfast, pack their lunches, walk them to the bus stop. After school, pick them up, help with homework, start dinner prep, do laundry, clean their rooms. Weekends were for deep cleaning, grocery shopping with Mom, and whatever random tasks she could think of. The best part? I got paid in empty promises and manipulation. If you're really good this week, maybe we'll get you that art set for Christmas. Spoiler alert, I never got the art set. Christmas came with practical gifts like clothes I needed anyway and a lecture about being grateful for what I had. Meanwhile, Jessica got dance lessons, Tommy got baseball equipment, and I got more chores. When I complained, Mom would get that wounded look in her eyes and remind me how much stress the family was under, how I was such a big helper, how my siblings really needed me. Dad's approach was more direct. You live here for free, you contribute. That's how families work. Never mind that Jessica and Tommy lived there for free too, without contributing anything except mess and attitude. By middle school, I was basically running a household while my parents worked, and my siblings enjoyed being kids. I knew every teacher's name, every permission slip deadline, every doctor's appointment. I knew which generic cereal Tommy would actually eat and which pajamas Jessica would refuse to wear. But what I didn't know was that this wasn't normal, that other families actually hired babysitters or shared responsibilities among adults, that children were supposed to have childhoods, not job descriptions. The worst part wasn't even the work itself. It was watching my parents pour attention, money, and opportunities into Jessica and Tommy while treating me like hired help who should be grateful for room and board. When I finally figured out that college might be my escape route, I started researching scholarships in secret. Because God knows asking my parents for tuition money would have been like asking them to fund my vacation to Mars. That was my first taste of what it felt like to bet on myself when nobody else would. The manipulation got more sophisticated as I got older. Mom had this whole system down to a science, really. She'd start with the guilt. "Leah, I don't know how I'd manage without you. You're so much more responsible than other kids your age." Then came the bribery. "If you handle dinner for the rest of the week, maybe we can talk about getting you a cell phone for your birthday." Keyword, maybe. My 15th birthday came and went without a cell phone. Apparently, I hadn't been quite responsible enough. Jessica, meanwhile, got her first iPhone at 13 because she needed it for emergencies. The emergency being that all her friends had one. The punishment system was equally refined. Refuse to do laundry? No TV until you do. Question why you're the only one cleaning bathrooms? No friends over this weekend? Express any frustration about missing school events because you're watching your siblings? Well, that's just selfish talk that disappoints the whole family. I became an expert at reading Mom's moods. The tight smile meant she was building up to ask for something big. The heavy sighs meant she was preparing her guilt arsenal. The fake enthusiasm meant she was about to promise something she had no intention of delivering. Dad was more straightforward in his exploitation. He'd come home from work, survey whatever mess the younger kids had made, and just look at me expectantly. No words needed. I knew my job. Sometimes I'd test the boundaries, just to see if anything had changed. "Mom, Jessica's old enough to pack her own lunch now." The response was always the same. "Oh, honey, you know how scattered she is in the mornings. You're so much better at making sure she has everything." Translation: why fix what isn't broken? Why teach Jessica responsibility when Leah will just handle it? The most insidious part was how they convinced me it was love. "We depend on you because you're special, Leah. You're mature, capable, reliable." They made my parentification sound like a compliment, like they were honoring my superior abilities rather than stealing my childhood. But even then, some small part of me knew better. When I watched TV shows about families, The parents didn't delegate parenting to their oldest kid. When I heard my friends talk about weekend plans that didn't involve household management, I felt something I couldn't name at the time. Resentment, maybe. Or grief for the childhood I never had. High school was when I started planning my escape in earnest. I researched every scholarship available, memorized GPA requirements, and threw myself into academic achievement like my life depended on it. Because it did. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Peterson, was the first adult who ever suggested I might deserve something for myself. "Have you considered applying to schools outside Washington?" she asked during a career meeting. "Your grades and test scores could open doors." Outside Washington? The idea had never occurred to me. In my family, you went to community college locally, if you went at all. You stayed close, contributed to the household, and certainly didn't abandon your responsibilities for something as selfish as personal growth. But sitting in Mrs. Peterson's office, looking at glossy college brochures from places like Oregon and California, I felt something dangerous stirring. Hope. When I mentioned scholarship opportunities at dinner, Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. College? But who would help with Jessica and Tommy? They're still so young. There it was. The real concern. Not my future, not my education, not my dreams. Who would replace their free labor? That night, I made a promise to myself. I was going to get out, even if it meant disappointing every single person in this house. Have you ever had to choose between your family's expectations and your own survival? Drop a comment below if you've been there. Junior year was when I got serious about my exit strategy. While Jessica was focused on which boy she wanted to ask her to prom, and Tommy was obsessing over his baseball card collection, I was practically living in the school library, researching everything from application deadlines to financial aid options. The first rejection letter came in March, then the second, and third. With every "we regret to inform you" letter, I felt my future slipping away. Mom would walk past me at the kitchen table where I was stress-eating cereal and sorting through college mail with this smug little expression. Not saying anything, but her silence spoke volumes. "See? I told you this college thing was a silly dream." Then, on a rainy Tuesday in April, everything changed. The letter from Oregon State University was thicker than the others. My hands actually shook as I opened it. Full academic scholarship. Housing included. 4 years, completely covered. I sat in my car in the school parking lot and cried for 20 minutes. Not sad tears. Relief tears. Freedom tears. The kind of tears that come when you realize you're not trapped forever. When I told my parents that night, the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. "Oregon?" Dad said, like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "What's wrong with Washington State? Or UW? The scholarship covers everything," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "Room, board, tuition. It's a full ride." Mom set down her coffee mug with unnecessary force. "And what about us? What about Jessica and Tommy? You can't just abandon your family, Leah." There it was. The word that had been hanging over my head for years. Abandon. As if wanting an education made me a traitor. As if pursuing my own future was somehow an act of betrayal. "They'll manage," I said, which was apparently the wrong thing to say because Mom's eyes immediately filled with tears. "How can you be so selfish?" she whispered. "After everything we've done for you." I wanted to ask what, exactly, they'd done for me besides provide the bare minimum of food and shelter while loading me down with responsibilities that weren't mine. But I was still 17, still programmed to feel guilty for wanting things. The next few months were a special kind of hell. Mom would make pointed comments about how overwhelmed she was, how she didn't know how she'd manage the kids' schedules without me. Dad would come home to a messy house and give me long, disappointed looks, as if my upcoming departure was somehow causing Jessica and Tommy to forget how to clean up after themselves. Jessica, who was 15 by then and perfectly capable of handling her own responsibilities, suddenly became helpless. "I don't know how to work the washing machine," she'd whine, despite having watched me use it hundreds of times. Tommy, at 13, developed selective amnesia about basic tasks like making his bed or remembering his homework. Amazing how quickly kids forget life skills when they know someone else will swoop in and handle everything. The guilt was overwhelming. These were my siblings. I loved them. But I was starting to understand that love didn't mean sacrificing my entire future for their convenience. Mrs. Peterson became my lifeline during those last few months. "Leah," she told me after I confided my doubts about leaving, "your job isn't to raise your parents' children. Your job is to become the person you're meant to be." August couldn't come fast enough. The night before I left for Oregon, Mom tried one last manipulation. She sat on the edge of my bed while I packed, tears streaming down her face. I just don't understand how my little girl became so cold, she said. This isn't how I raised you. Actually, it was exactly how she'd raised me. She'd raised me to be independent, responsible, and capable of handling anything. She just never expected me to use those skills to save myself. But for the first time in my life, I didn't comfort her. I didn't apologize. I didn't promise to change my mind. I'll call when I get settled, I said instead, and kept packing. Oregon State University was like landing on a different planet. My roommate Emma was this bubbly blonde from Portland whose biggest responsibility at home had been remembering to feed her goldfish. She couldn't believe I knew how to do laundry, cook actual meals, and keep a schedule without setting 17 phone alarms. Wait, you've been taking care of your siblings since you were 8? She asked during our first week, watching me organize my textbooks by color and due date. That's insane. My mom wouldn't even let me babysit until I was 16. It was the first time anyone had called my childhood what it actually was. Insane. I threw myself into college life with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. I joined study groups, went to campus events, and discovered what it felt like to have free time that wasn't scheduled around someone else's needs. I stayed up late not because Tommy had nightmares, but because I was reading for pleasure. Revolutionary concept. The guilt calls from home started immediately. Mom would phone every few weeks, her voice carefully measured to achieve maximum emotional impact. Jessica's grades are slipping, she'd report. She's having trouble staying organized without you here to help her. Tommy's been asking when you're coming home. He misses his big sister. The house feels so different without you. So quiet and sad. I'd hang up feeling terrible for about an hour, then remember that Jessica was a sophomore in high school and Tommy was in 8th grade. They were perfectly capable of handling their own lives if anyone bothered to expect it of them. Work study wasn't available through my scholarship, so I found a job waiting tables at Rosie's Diner, a local place that served comfort food to homesick college students and community regulars. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was this tiny woman in her 60s who ran the place like a benevolent dictator, and somehow knew exactly which customers needed extra attention and which ones needed to be left alone. You work like someone running from something, she told me after my first month, watching me efficiently balance 4 plates while mentally calculating tip percentages. She wasn't wrong. I was running from the life where I'd been stuck, and toward something that was entirely my own. The hardest part was holidays. While Emma went home to family gatherings where she was the cherished youngest daughter, I'd get increasingly desperate voicemails from Mom about how wrong it felt to have Thanksgiving without me, how disappointed everyone was, how much they needed me there. But I couldn't afford the plane ticket home. My scholarship covered education costs, but extras like holiday travel? That was on me. Between my diner wages and textbook expenses, I was lucky to afford ramen noodles and the occasional coffee. I spent my first Thanksgiving eating cafeteria turkey with other stranded students, telling myself it was fine. It was freedom. It was what I'd wanted. Christmas was worse. Emma's family invited me to join them in Portland, but their kindness felt too overwhelming. Instead, I stayed in the dorm with 2 international students and binge-watched Netflix while my phone buzzed with messages I couldn't bring myself to answer. Leah, we're opening presents without you. It doesn't feel right. Tommy made you a card. He keeps asking when you'll see it. Your empty chair at dinner is breaking my heart. The manipulation was world-class. I'll give her that. Mom had elevated guilt-tripping to an art form. But something had shifted in me. Maybe it was having actual friends who thought my family's expectations were bizarre. Maybe it was having professors who encouraged my academic ambitions. Maybe it was just distance. For the first time in my life, I had space to think about what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed from me. And what I wanted was to keep building this new life, even if it meant disappointing the people who'd never supported my dreams anyway. By spring semester, the guilt calls became less frequent. Maybe Mom was accepting reality. Maybe she was just tired of my polite but firm refusals to drop out and come home. Either way, I was learning something invaluable. The world didn't end when I put myself first. It actually got a lot more interesting. Senior year arrived faster than I expected. Between maintaining my scholarship GPA and pulling double shifts at Rosie's during busy weekends, 4 years had flown by in a blur of textbooks, coffee, and the gradual realization that I was actually good at this whole independence thing. My major in business administration with a focus on operations management felt like destiny. All those years of juggling household schedules, managing family logistics, and keeping everyone's lives running smoothly, turns out those weren't just survival skills. They were actual qualifications. Mrs. Chen had become something of a mentor, which surprised both of us. One slow Tuesday afternoon during my final semester, she sat across from me in a corner booth while I updated inventory spreadsheets. You graduate soon, she said, stirring honey into her tea. What's the plan? Apply for entry-level management positions. Start somewhere with growth potential. I'd rehearsed this answer for career fair interviews, but saying it out loud to someone who actually knew me felt different. Where? That was the question I'd been avoiding. I don't know yet. Probably Portland. Maybe Seattle. What I didn't say, going back to Washington felt like giving up. Like admitting that all this education and growth had been temporary, and I was ready to slip back into my old role. But Mrs. Chen was studying my face with that uncanny ability she had to read people's real thoughts. Or maybe you're scared to go home because they'll expect you to be the same person who left. Bingo. 4 years later, and I still felt like I was one guilt trip away from reverting to my childhood role as family caretaker. Then fate intervened in the form of a campus job fair. I wasn't even planning to attend, but Emma dragged me along for moral support while she interviewed with marketing firms. While waiting for her, I wandered over to a booth for a mid-sized logistics company called Streamline Solutions. The recruiter, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia, looked at my resume for about 30 seconds before asking, "When can you start? Don't you want to interview me first?" Honey, anyone who maintained a 3.9 GPA while working 25 hours a week has already proven everything I need to know. The question is whether you want to work for a company that recognizes talent. The position was operations coordinator at their Pacific Northwest branch. Excellent benefits, competitive salary, and here's the kicker. It was based in Spokane. Close enough to visit family when I chose to, far enough to maintain the independence I'd fought so hard to build. But the best part? They wanted me to start immediately after graduation. No job hunting stress, no months of uncertainty. Just a clean transition from college student to professional adult. I called home that night with the news, feeling genuinely excited to share something positive. "That's wonderful, sweetie," Mom said, and I could hear the genuine pride in her voice for about 3 seconds before the other shoe dropped. "Spokane's not that far. You could probably visit every other weekend. Maybe help out when we really need you." There it was. The assumption that my success was really about my availability to them. Dad got on the line. "Good for you, kiddo. About time you started contributing to the family finances." Contributing to the family finances. As if my purpose was to funnel money back into the household I'd escaped. As if my degree was just a stepping stone to becoming a more effective support system for people who'd never supported me. But instead of the old familiar guilt, I felt something new. Clarity. "Actually," I said, "I'm planning to get my own place and focus on building my career. But I'm excited to be close enough to visit when it works out." The silence on the other end was deafening. When I graduated summa cum laude that spring, my family didn't attend. "Too expensive," Mom explained. "Too hard to arrange time off work. Too complicated with the kids' schedules." I walked across that stage alone, collected my diploma, and felt nothing but pride. Mrs. Chen was in the audience, cheering loud enough to embarrass Emma's entire extended family. Sometimes the people who become your real family aren't the ones you're born with. 2 weeks later, I packed my ancient Honda Civic with everything I owned and drove east toward my new life. In the rearview mirror, the ocean grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. What I didn't know was that returning to Washington would teach me the difference between helping people I loved and enabling people who'd never learned to help themselves. Spokane was everything I'd hoped for. Big enough to build a career, small enough to feel manageable, and exactly the right distance from my childhood home. I found a decent one-bedroom apartment near the office, furnished it with a combination of garage sale finds and IKEA basics, and threw myself into learning everything I could about logistics management. Streamline Solutions was the perfect place to cut my teeth. Medium-sized company, growing fast, with enough chaos to make my problem-solving skills valuable, and enough structure to teach me professional best practices. Patricia had been right about recognizing talent. Within 6 months, I was running point on major client accounts and loving every minute of it. I'd been working there for about 8 months when curiosity finally got the better of me. During a weekend trip to Seattle for a work conference, I decided to drive the extra hour to see my family. Just a quick visit. See how everyone was doing. Maybe prove to myself that I'd grown enough to handle being home without falling back into old patterns. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, but something felt different when Mom answered the door. She seemed smaller somehow. Older. The house behind her was messier than I remembered, and she looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Leah, why didn't you call? I would have cleaned up, made something nice for dinner." Inside, the difference was stark. The living room was cluttered with Tommy's baseball equipment and Jessica's art supplies. The kitchen sink was full of dishes, and there was a pile of unopened mail on the counter that looked like it had been growing for weeks. "Where is everyone?" I asked, automatically starting to stack dishes. "Dad's at work, obviously. Saturday shift, overtime pay." Mom sat heavily at the kitchen table. "Tommy's at practice. Jessica's at her friend Madison's house. It's just me here most days." She looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. This was the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been managing alone and wasn't handling it well. Over the next hour, the full picture emerged. Dad had been taking extra shifts to cover some financial gaps. Mom had been working more hours too, but childcare was expensive, so she'd been trying to manage the house and keep track of 2 teenagers while holding down her job at the dental office. "It's just been harder than I expected," she admitted. "When you were here, everything ran so smoothly. I never realized how much you were handling." There it was, the acknowledgement I'd wanted to hear for years. But instead of feeling vindicated, I felt sorry for her. She looked overwhelmed and lost, like someone who'd been depending on a system she didn't understand and was only now realizing how much she'd relied on it. Tommy burst through the door around 4, sweaty and excited from baseball practice. At 16, he'd grown into this lanky teenager with Dad's stubborn jaw and Mom's tendency to lose track of his belongings. "Leah! Mom! Why didn't you tell me she was coming?" He hugged me with genuine enthusiasm, then immediately started updating me on his season stats, his girlfriend drama, and his plans for junior year. But underneath his excitement, I could see the strain. His backpack was stuffed with crumpled papers and overdue assignments. His baseball uniform needed washing. His schedule was a mess because nobody was keeping track of it the way I used to. Jessica arrived home an hour later, now 17 and stunningly beautiful in that effortless way teenage girls sometimes are. But she'd inherited more than Mom's cheekbones. She'd also inherited the expectation that someone else would handle the details of her life. "Oh good, you're here," she said, like my visit was a scheduled service call. "Can you help me figure out my college applications? The deadlines are confusing and Mom doesn't really understand the requirements." The automatic, "of course," was on my lips before I caught myself. Old habits. "Actually, I'm just visiting for today," I said instead. "But I'm sure Mom can help you figure out the deadlines. And the guidance counselors at school are great resources." Jessica's face fell like I'd refused to share my lunch with a starving person. That night at dinner, everyone was awkwardly polite. Dad asked about my job, complimented my new car, and mentioned how grown up I seemed. But underneath the pleasantries, there was this uncomfortable awareness that the family dynamic had shifted, and nobody quite knew how to navigate it. When I left the next morning, Mom walked me to my car. "You seem so confident now," she said. "Different. Independent." "I've had to be." She looked like she wanted to say more, but settled for a tight hug. "Don't be a stranger, okay? We miss you more than you know." Driving away, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Pride at how far I'd come, sadness for how much they were struggling, and something I didn't want to examine too closely. Responsibility. Not the forced responsibility of my childhood, but the voluntary kind that came with having the means to help and the knowledge that they genuinely needed it. That was my first mistake. Confusing, having the ability to help with having the obligation to rescue them. It started small, like these things always do. A phone call from Mom 3 weeks after my visit. Voice carefully casual, but with an undercurrent of stress, I recognized immediately. "Honey, I hate to bother you, but I'm in a bit of a bind. The car registration is due and Jessica needs some supplies for her art class, and with Dad taking time off for that back injury." She didn't directly ask for money. Mom was too smart for that. Instead, she painted a picture of temporary hardship and trusted me to offer the solution myself, which I did, of course. I set up a credit card with her as an authorized user, just for emergencies, just until Dad got back to full-time hours, just to help with unexpected expenses. "You're such a lifesaver, Leah. I don't know what we'd do without you." The first month's statement showed $400 in charges, groceries, gas, Tommy's baseball cleats, and yes, Jessica's art supplies. Reasonable expenses for a family managing a temporary setback. I paid it without thinking twice. Month 2 was $600. Month 3 pushed $800. Still justifiable, still technically emergency expenses, but the pattern was becoming clear. My safety net was rapidly becoming their primary financial resource. The insurance issue came to light during a casual phone conversation in November. Mom mentioned having to reschedule some appointments because Dad's employer had changed their health coverage and there was a gap between policies. "How long has the house insurance been lapsed?" I asked, that familiar knot forming in my stomach. "Oh, just a few months. The premium went up and we've been meaning to shop around for better rates, but you know how busy things get." "A few months." Their mortgage required continuous coverage. If the bank found out, there could be serious consequences. And if something happened to the house while it was uninsured, I called the insurance company that afternoon and reinstated their policy under my bank account. $1 and $200 upfront, $150 monthly going forward. Another temporary fix that we all knew wasn't temporary at all. Tommy's emergency room visit in December sealed the deal on the health insurance situation. Dislocated shoulder during basketball practice, and of course it happened during the coverage gap. The bill was over $3,000. "I can't ask you to pay for this," Mom said, but her voice was already defeated. "We'll figure out a payment plan somehow." Except we both knew that a payment plan on Dad's reduced income would mean choosing between medical bills and utility bills. So I called my insurance company and added both Tommy and Jessica to my plan. Emergency coverage, I told myself, just until they got back on their feet. By Christmas, I was carrying an extra $500 per month in family expenses: credit card, insurance, health coverage, and random emergencies that seemed to occur with suspicious regularity. But things were stabilizing. Dad's back was healing, he was returning to full-time work, and Mom seemed less stressed during our weekly calls. I felt useful in a way I hadn't since leaving home. Not the resentful, obligated usefulness of childhood, but the warm satisfaction of being able to help people I cared about during a rough patch. I was the successful daughter, the one who'd made it, the one who could afford to share her good fortune. The trap was so beautifully constructed that I didn't even see the bars until they were locked. Jessica's acceptance to state came in March, along with a financial aid package that covered tuition, but left room and board, books, and living expenses uncovered. About $15,000 per year that the family couldn't possibly afford. "She's so smart, Leah. Her grades are excellent. Her art portfolio is incredible. She just needs a chance." Mom's voice was full of maternal pride and barely concealed desperation. And there it was. The moment when helping during hard times became funding their lifestyle indefinitely. Because if I could afford to pay their insurance and credit card bills, surely I could afford to invest in my sister's education. Surely I wouldn't want to be the reason Jessica missed out on college opportunities. So I did it. I took out a personal loan against my own financial security to cover Jessica's college expenses. Because that's what family does. Because I loved them. Because saying no would make me the selfish daughter who forgot where she came from. What I didn't understand yet was that every time I solved their problems, I was preventing them from learning to solve problems themselves. Every financial rescue was actually enabling a dependency that would only grow stronger over time. But I wouldn't figure that out until the night I stood on their doorstep, soaking wet and homeless, and learned exactly how much my sacrifices had meant to them. September 15th was the kind of day that starts normal and ends with your entire life perspective shifted sideways. I remember it clearly because I'd been particularly proud of myself that morning, having closed a major client deal that would mean a significant bonus and possibly a promotion. I'd texted the family group chat about my success, gotten the usual supportive responses. "So proud of you," from Mom, a thumbs-up emoji from Jessica, complete silence from Tommy, which was par for the course, and treated myself to an expensive coffee on the way home. My apartment complex was 4 years old, well-maintained, in a nice part of town. I'd chosen it specifically for its reliability. Good building management, solid construction, the kind of place where catastrophic plumbing failures weren't supposed to happen. But when I turned the corner toward my building at 6:30 that evening, I could see water pouring from the stairwell like a small waterfall. My stomach dropped before my brain had fully processed what I was seeing. The apartment above mine had experienced what the maintenance guy would later describe as a catastrophic pipe burst. The main line had somehow ruptured while the tenant was at work, sending water cascading through the ceiling, down the walls, and into every corner of my one-bedroom sanctuary. My couch was floating. Actually floating. My carefully organized bookshelves had collapsed, sending soggy novels across the hardwood floor like casualties of war. The carpet in my bedroom was soaked through to the subflooring. The electronics I'd saved for months to buy were destroyed. Everything I'd built in my little space was ruined. The building manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, met me in the hallway with insurance paperwork and genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Leah. The restoration company says it'll be at least a week, maybe 2, before the unit is habitable again. Do you have somewhere you can stay?" Of course I had somewhere. I had family 20 minutes away. People who loved me, who would obviously want to help during an emergency. People who'd been depending on my financial support for months and would surely return the favor when I needed them. I grabbed what salvageable belongings I could fit in my car, along with a pillow that had somehow stayed dry, and drove toward my childhood home feeling grateful to have a safety net. The porch light was on when I pulled into the driveway, and I could see the familiar glow of the television through the living room windows. home, sanctuary, the place where I'd always belong, regardless of how complicated our relationship had become. Mom answered the door in her pajamas and robe, and for a split second, her face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. "Leah, what are you doing here? Why didn't you call?" Then her eyes traveled to the pillow in my arms, the overnight bag slung over my shoulder, and something shifted in her expression. "My apartment flooded," I explained. "Completely destroyed. I just need somewhere to crash for a few days while they repair the damage." I was smiling, probably looked a little shell-shocked, but trying to stay positive about the whole situation. Just a temporary inconvenience. A chance for some family bonding. Maybe we'd stay up late talking like we used to when I was young. Mom's expression went from surprised to uncomfortable to something I couldn't quite identify. She glanced back toward the living room, then at me, then down at the pillow I was holding. "Oh, honey," she said, and her voice had that carefully measured tone she used when she was about to say something she knew I wouldn't like. This isn't really a hotel, you know? We have our routines. Our space is arranged for us." I stood there for a moment, not quite processing what she was saying. This was my mother. This was my family. I'd been paying their bills for almost a year. Surely she wasn't actually turning me away. "Mom, it's just for a few days, maybe a week. The insurance will cover a hotel eventually, but right now I just need—" "There are shelters," she said, and the words hung in the air between us like a slap. "Resources for people in your situation. It's probably better to use the proper channels rather than impose on family." Impose on family. I was imposing on family by asking for one night's shelter after a disaster that had left me temporarily homeless. The family I'd been financially supporting was worried about me imposing on them. "Right," I said, my voice sounding strange even to me, distant and hollow. "Of course, wouldn't want to impose." She was already closing the door, probably eager to get back to whatever TV show I'd interrupted. "I hope everything works out, sweetie. Keep us posted on how the insurance situation develops." And then the door was closed. The porch light was still on, and I was standing alone in the darkness with my pillow and my overnight bag, trying to understand what had just happened. Behind me, my car waited in the driveway. My car that would become my bedroom for the next 7 days. My car that was apparently a more reliable shelter than the people I'd been rescuing for months. That was the moment I finally understood the true nature of our family dynamic. I was useful when they needed something. I was family when it cost them nothing. But when they might be inconvenienced by my needs, when helping me might disrupt their routine or require actual effort, well, there were shelters for people like me. Sleeping in your car teaches you things about yourself that you never wanted to learn. Like how your body adapts to impossible positions when it has no choice. Like how dignity becomes a luxury you can't afford when you're brushing your teeth in gas station bathrooms. Like how invisible you become to the world when you don't have an address. That first night, I sat in my Honda Civic in the parking lot of my apartment complex, listening to the rain tap against the windows and trying to process what had happened. My mother's words kept replaying. "There are shelters. Resources for people in your situation. People in my situation." As if I were a stranger who'd wandered onto their doorstep, not their daughter who'd been covering their insurance payments. I'd expected anger, but what I felt was something more dangerous. Clarity. For the first time in months, I could see our relationship without the haze of obligation and guilt. When I needed them, they weren't available. When they needed me, my availability was assumed. The gym membership I'd maintained for stress relief became my salvation. 24-hour access meant I could shower before work, brush my teeth, and maintain some semblance of professional appearance. The overnight staff pretended not to notice that I was there at unusual hours, which I appreciated more than they could know. Work became my refuge. My colleagues had no idea that I was living out of my car, and I was determined to keep it that way. I arrived early, stayed late, and threw myself into projects with the intensity of someone who had nowhere else to go. The insurance adjuster was sympathetic but moved with the speed of bureaucracy. Yes, they would cover temporary housing. Eventually. After the claim was processed. After contractors provided estimates. After paperwork moved through multiple departments. "These things take time," he explained during our third phone call. "But you should be able to move back within 2 weeks." 2 weeks became my mantra. I could handle anything for 2 weeks. I'd been handling impossible situations my entire life. This was just another challenge to overcome. But what I hadn't expected was the silence from my family. Day 2. No calls, no texts, no concern about where I'd spent the night. Day 3. I texted Mom with an update about the insurance process. Her response was a thumbs up emoji. Day 4. Jessica posted pictures from a college party on social media while I was eating cold pizza in my car for dinner. Day 5, Tommy had a baseball game. I knew because I still had his schedule in my phone from when I used to help coordinate rides. Nobody thought to invite me, though I probably couldn't have attended anyway since I was living in my car. By day 6, I realized they weren't going to ask. They genuinely didn't care where I was sleeping or how I was managing. The daughter who'd been solving their problems for months had become inconvenient, so they'd simply not thought about me. The final insult came in the form of a credit card statement. While I was sleeping in my car, someone had charged $300 at Target to the emergency card I'd given Mom. When I called to ask about it, her response was casual to the point of cruelty. "Oh, Jessica needed some things for her dorm room. You know how expensive college is." Jessica needed things for her dorm room, while her sister was homeless. "Mom, I'm living in my car right now." A pause. Then, "Well, that's temporary. Jessica's education is an investment." That night, parked behind a 24-hour diner with my phone plugged into the cigarette lighter for power, I made a decision that would define the rest of my relationship with my family. I was done. Not done loving them. Not done caring about them. But done allowing them to treat my resources as their entitlement while treating my needs as my own problem to solve. The next morning, I called the credit card company and removed Mom as an authorized user. I called the insurance company and transferred their house policy back to their name, effective at the end of the billing cycle. I reviewed my bank account and calculated exactly how much I'd been subsidizing their lifestyle. $847 per month. Almost $10,000 over the year I'd been helping. Money that could have paid for a hotel during my crisis. Money that could have covered my own emergency fund. Money that they'd accepted without question when it benefited them and forgot about entirely when I needed support. But I left the health insurance alone. Tommy and Jessica hadn't chosen their parents' priorities. They deserved medical coverage regardless of how their mother treated their sister. On day 7, the restoration team finally cleared my apartment for occupancy. The new flooring was beautiful, the fresh paint made everything look bright and clean, and my replacement furniture was being delivered that afternoon. As I carried my belongings back inside, my phone rang. Mom, probably calling about some new crisis that required my intervention. I let it go to voicemail. For the first time in my adult life, someone else's emergency wasn't my priority. I had my own life to rebuild, my own priorities to focus on, and my own future to secure. The woman who'd been raised to solve everyone else's problems was learning to solve her own first. And that woman was about to teach my family what life looked like when their reliable safety net decided to catch herself instead. The voicemail from Mom was exactly what I expected. Confused, hurt, and entitled in equal measure. "Leah, honey, I'm not sure what happened with the credit card, but it was declined at the grocery store today. There must be some mistake. Call me back so we can straighten this out. No apology for turning me away when I was homeless. No acknowledgement that maybe charging $300 for college decorations while I lived in my car was inappropriate. Just concern about their inconvenience and confidence that I would fix it." I didn't call back. 3 hours later, my phone rang again. This time it was Dad, his voice carrying that edge of irritation he got when things didn't go according to his expectations. "Leah, what's this about the insurance being canceled? We got a notice from the company saying the policy's being transferred back to us. We can't afford to pick up that payment right now." Of course they couldn't. They'd become accustomed to having their major expenses covered by their daughter's generosity. The idea of resuming financial responsibility for their own lives was apparently shocking. "The policy isn't canceled," I said calmly. "It's being transferred back to your name. You're adults. You can manage your own insurance. But we agreed you'd handle it temporarily while we got back on our feet. Had we agreed to that?" I tried to remember any conversation where terms had been discussed, timelines established, or mutual expectations laid out. All I remembered was crisis after crisis, with me stepping in to solve each problem as it arose. "Dad, I was temporarily helping during Dad's injury. That was over 6 months ago. You're back to full-time work. The temporary situation is resolved." Silence on his end. Then, "What's gotten into you? This isn't like you, Leah." He was right. It wasn't like me. The old Leah would have apologized for any inconvenience, promised to fix whatever problems my boundaries were creating, and resumed my role as the family's financial safety net. But the old Leah had never been turned away from her childhood home while homeless. "I'm prioritizing my own financial stability," I said, "just like you prioritize yours." After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the temporary relief that came after solving someone else's crisis, but the deep, lasting peace of knowing I wasn't responsible for problems I didn't create. Jessica called that evening, her voice carefully modulated to achieve maximum emotional impact, a technique she'd learned from Mom, though she wielded it with less subtlety. Leah, I don't understand what's happening. Mom says you're cutting us off financially. Are you mad about something? Did we do something wrong? The innocence in her voice was almost convincing. Almost. Jessica, do you know I was homeless for a week? A pause. What do you mean homeless? I mean my apartment was destroyed and I slept in my car for 7 days because Mom turned me away when I asked for help, while you were charging dorm decorations to the credit card I'd given the family for emergencies. Another pause. Longer this time. I didn't know you were homeless. Mom didn't tell me that. Of course she hadn't, because then Jessica might have felt guilty about spending money on wants while her sister slept in a Honda Civic. Much easier to keep everyone compartmentalized, uninformed about the full picture. Well, now you know, and now you also know that I won't be subsidizing anyone's lifestyle indefinitely. You're 19, Jessica. Smart, capable, and perfectly able to work part-time to cover your own expenses like millions of other college students. But you make so much more than I could working part-time, because I worked through college and built my career instead of relying on someone else to fund my choices. The conversation ended badly, with Jessica in tears and me feeling like the villain in a story where I'd somehow become the bad guy for refusing to bankroll other people's lives. But I was learning to live with being misunderstood. It was a small price to pay for financial independence and emotional clarity. Over the following weeks, the calls became less frequent and more strategic. Mom would mention struggling with grocery money right before Tommy's birthday. Dad would bring up unexpected car repairs when he knew I'd just received a bonus. Jessica would casually mention textbook expenses during conversations that started with catching up on family news. Each call was a test. Would I resume my old role? Would guilt override my newfound boundaries? Would I prioritize their comfort over my own growth? Each time I maintained my position. Polite but firm. Sympathetic but unchanging. I was not responsible for their financial choices. I was not obligated to solve problems they'd managed before my help and could manage again. I was not required to set myself on fire to keep other people warm. The woman who'd been programmed from childhood to serve others was finally learning to serve herself first. And that lesson was about to transform every relationship in her life. The manipulation campaign that followed was masterful in its desperation. Mom had decades of experience managing my guilt triggers, and she deployed every technique in her arsenal with the precision of a seasoned general. It started with the health crisis calls. Dad's back was acting up again. It wasn't, but how could I verify that from a distance? Mom had found a lump. She hadn't, but the possibility kept me awake for 2 nights. Tommy had been complaining of chest pains during baseball practice. He had mild exercise-induced asthma that he'd managed fine for years. When health scares didn't restore my financial support, she moved to emotional terrorism. I don't even recognize you anymore, she said during a particularly brutal phone call in November. The daughter I raised would never abandon her family like this. I'm starting to think all that education changed you into someone selfish and cold. Selfish and cold. For declining to subsidize grown adults who'd turned me away when I was homeless. I lie awake at night wondering where I went wrong, she continued, her voice breaking in exactly the right places. I must have failed as a mother to raise a daughter who cares more about money than family. The psychological manipulation was so sophisticated that for a moment I almost fell for it. Almost called back later to apologize, to reinstate their credit card access, to resume my role as the family ATM. Almost. But then I remembered my week living in my car, and the guilt faded into something much more useful. Anger. Mom, I said, and my voice was steadier than I'd expected. You don't get to question my character. You turned me away when I was homeless. You charged luxury items to my credit card while I was living in my car. You treated my resources as your entitlement and my needs as my own problem to solve. That's not... We didn't know. You didn't ask. For 7 days, you didn't call, text, or check on me. You just assumed I'd figure it out while you figured out how to spend my money. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 25 years of unbalanced expectations. But you're our daughter, she said finally, as if that explained everything, as if biology created obligation regardless of behavior. Yes, and you're my mother. Think about what that meant when I needed you. Christmas approached with the subtlety of a freight train. The family dynamics had shifted dramatically since my boundaries went into effect, and nobody quite knew how to navigate the new territory. Jessica came home from college for winter break and immediately started working as a server at a local restaurant, not because she enjoyed it, but because her parents could no longer afford to cover all her expenses, and she'd discovered that textbooks and social activities required actual money. Tommy had taken on a paper route and was saving for a car instead of expecting one to be gifted to him. He seemed genuinely proud of earning his own money, though he grumbled about waking up early on weekends. Dad had picked up additional weekend construction projects to cover the insurance payments I'd been handling. His back complained, but his bank account stabilized. Mom had returned to full-time work at the dental office and was learning to manage the household budget without my supplemental income. She was stressed, overwhelmed, and working harder than she had in years. They were surviving, managing, taking responsibility for their own lives in ways they hadn't since I'd started rescuing them. The Christmas Eve phone call came while I was wrapping presents for the few family members who'd actually maintained a relationship with me, rather than just a financial dependency. Aunt Sarah, who'd always checked on me during college, my cousin Mark, who'd sent a congratulations card when I got my promotion. People who saw me as more than a bank account with a family connection. "Leah, we want you to come for Christmas dinner," Mom said. "The whole family will be here. It won't feel right without you." "Will it feel right to have me there after turning me away when I was homeless?" I asked. "Can't we just move past that? It's Christmas. Time for forgiveness and family." Forgiveness, in her mind, meant pretending nothing had happened so we could return to our previous dynamic. It meant absolving them of responsibility for their choices while requiring me to resume mine. "I'm spending Christmas with people who actually wanted me around when I needed them," I said. For the first time in our conversation, her voice lost its calculated warmth. "Fine, be stubborn, but don't expect us to keep trying forever. Family has limits, Leah. Family has limits." She was right about that, though not in the way she meant. The family I'd been born into had limits on their consideration, empathy, and support. But the family I was building, friends who became chosen family, colleagues who celebrated my successes, people who showed up during crises, that family had entirely different boundaries. As I hung up the phone, I realized something profound. I wasn't losing my family by setting boundaries. I was discovering who my real family had been all along. 2 years later, I was standing in the kitchen of my new house, an actual house with a mortgage in my name only, when the call came that changed everything. Dad was in the hospital. Heart attack. Serious but stable. Mom's voice was smaller than I'd heard it since childhood, stripped of manipulation and calculation. Just fear. "Leah, I know things have been difficult between us, but he's asking for you." I drove to the hospital that afternoon, not because I'd forgotten their behavior, but because I'd grown into someone who could help when appropriate without sacrificing myself in the process. Dad looked fragile against the white hospital sheets, older than I'd expected. The past 2 years of managing their own responsibilities had aged both my parents, though in ways that seemed to have strengthened them rather than weakened them. "You look good, kiddo," he said when I walked into his room. "Successful. Happy." I was both of those things. The promotion had come through 6 months earlier. I'd started dating a wonderful man named David who understood boundaries and celebrated my independence. My savings account was healthy, my stress levels were manageable, and my self-respect was fully intact. "How are you feeling?" I asked, pulling up the visitor's chair. "Like an idiot," he admitted. "For more than just the heart attack." We talked for an hour. Really talked. Perhaps for the first time in my adult life. He apologized, not with the manipulative tactics I'd come to expect, but with genuine recognition of how their treatment had affected me. "We leaned on you too hard," he said. "Took advantage of your sense of responsibility. And when you needed us," he trailed off, shaking his head. "You weren't there," I finished. "No, we weren't. And that was wrong." Mom appeared in the doorway, hesitant to enter. She'd lost weight and gained gray hair, but there was something different in her posture. Less entitled. More aware. "Can I come in?" The conversation that followed was awkward, painful, and necessary. For the first time, my parents acknowledged the reality of our family dynamic instead of the fiction they'd constructed to justify it. "We treated you like a parent when you were a child," Mom said, "and like a bank when you were an adult. We never just appreciated you for who you were." It wasn't a complete transformation. Decades of patterns don't disappear overnight, but it was a beginning. Over the following months, we rebuilt our relationship on entirely different terms. I visited when I wanted to, not when they needed something. I offered help occasionally, but only when they'd already tried to solve problems themselves. Most importantly, they stopped treating my success as their resource. Jessica graduated college with a degree in graphic design and a part-time job that would become a full-time career. The experience of earning her own money had taught her things about independence that my funding never could. Tommy finished high school with solid grades and a work ethic he'd developed through necessity. He chose a community college and a part-time construction job with Dad's company, learning trade skills while earning his degree. My parents' marriage strengthened as they learned to face challenges together instead of delegating them to their eldest daughter. They discovered capabilities they'd forgotten they had when I wasn't available to handle everything. Today, when people ask me about family relationships, I tell them this: love isn't enough. Respect matters. Boundaries matter. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's dysfunction. I'm not the family caretaker anymore. I'm not the emergency fund or the problem solver or the automatic yes to every request. I'm a daughter who loves her family enough to let them be responsible for their own lives. And for the first time since I was 8 years old, that feels exactly right. The little girl who was forced to grow up too fast learned to give herself the childhood kindness she never received. The young woman who sacrificed her own needs for everyone else's comfort learned to prioritize her own well-being. The daughter who was taken for granted learned to require the respect she'd always deserved. Some people might call that selfish. I call it survival. Because the most radical thing a woman can do is decide that she matters just as much as everyone she's been taught to serve. And once you learn that lesson, you can never unlearn it. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not punishment, not proving a point. Just the quiet revolution of putting yourself first in a world that taught you to come last. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice when the world tries to silence it. The strongest people aren't the ones who never fall down. They're the ones who get back up and refuse to apologize for taking up space. The woman who sleeps in her own bed, in her own house, bought with her own money, no longer wonders if she deserves comfort. She knows she does. And that knowledge changes everything.